Hello again. Welcome to Campaigniacs. I'm Murray Mandrick, political columnist for the Regina Leader Post. We are, 11 days away from the election right now. So we're getting a little closer to the wire after the debate. And speaking of that debate, we're going to talk a fair bit about that today and other things related to First Nation issues. With me today, as usual, is Arthur White-Crummey, who is Leader Post legislative reporter covering this campaign. And it is an absolute privilege to welcome much younger than me friend, Merelda Fiddler. Let me get all the titles straight. Vanier scholar, reform journalist, professor at First Nations University or instructor at First Nations University. How much time do we have on a 20-minute podcast to get all your titles in now, my friend? Not enough.
Well, yeah, I guess I do a lot of different things now, but I'm just really excited to be working with you again.
Yeah. Merelda and I were on the debate last night for those of you who haven't seen it, and it was just an absolute privilege. She's a brilliant lady, as you'll soon find out. But before we go there, let's catch up with the week. God, it has been, 8 days since the last time we did one of these podcasts. I think there's only really been 4 campaigning days because they pretty much took the long weekend off and pretty much 2 days for debate preparation. But so much has happened. We've had the platforms come out. We've had more scuttle about the scandal and certainly debate last night. But let's start with our poll that came out this morning. Arthur, can you give us a synopsis in rough terms what it says?
Well, it's certainly bad news for the NDP and fairly encouraging for the Sask party. Essentially, we're about where we were when we started this campaign. We already had an ECOS poll before the campaign that put the Sask party 25 points above, a different one that put them 30 points above. Now we're at 27, so we're essentially splitting the difference. It doesn't seem like we've moved that much. There's a lot more insight in this poll than just the horse race number, though, because it tells us the way that the party leaders are being perceived and what issues might be driving the vote. And what's really interesting,
because I found that interesting. Go ahead.
Well, the thing about that is that the Sask party seems to be successful in winning over voters on its preferred terrain of the economy. From the beginning, Scott Moe has said this election is a choice about who you trust to lead the province through the economic recovery. It seems like a lot of voters agree with that. Economic issues were 3 of the top 5 issues, things like resources, things like economic growth, taxes, and for people that care about those issues, the Sask party is truly dominating. For resources, they were up 83 points, higher than the NDP, basically wiping them out. So the NDP has some bright spots. They're doing well on healthcare, they're doing well on education, but they're still splitting support with the Sask party, even on their stronger issues. Whereas the Sask party is running away with the economic issues.
Yeah, that's fascinating because the bright spot that I saw in the poll for the NDP is that people, and I don't mean to sound cruel about this, but people really want them to be the opposition, or rather they really want an opposition. And under the circumstances that they're now in with 13 seats, that actually could be a positive where people could be electing them as an anti-government vote, particularly in Regina and Saskatoon. Doesn't look like much is going to move in rural Saskatchewan, obviously. But yeah, tell us about just briefly about the whole notion of the positivity of that for the NDP as it relates to an electorate being wise enough, smart enough to understand maybe big government's not exactly the best thing for us right now.
Yeah, there does seem to be an appetite for change and a hunger for different options. Certainly, there was almost half of voters feeling like the Sask party majorities have been too large recently. There were even Sask party voters who felt that the province needs a stronger opposition. Unfortunately, that's just not translating into support for the NDP. There's a hunger for change, but it doesn't seem like people are choosing the NDP as the vehicle to deliver it. And unfortunately, none of the third parties have really gotten the exposure or made the credible case to convince people that they're the ones to do it either.
Well, I guess we can think, or maybe understand at least that this is a poll taken halfway through a campaign, and though you make the valid point, nothing has moved. Nothing has really moved in the 4-year term, except for whatever happened in 2017 when we had that budget. But things do move sometimes in a campaign, and sometimes the thing that makes them move is the debate. So I just want to switch to that for a moment and bring Merelda in, because you were sitting there with me, looking much better, asking much smarter things, I might add. But do you get a sense, just in their overall body language, that you saw last night of the leaders that maybe you didn't have before, Merelda? And I ask you that because, as I say, you're a forum journalist, but a journalist. Like, was there something that you're sort of sensing that you saw last night that kind of surprised you, particularly in relation to your questions, which were absolutely excellent?
Well, thank you, Murray. I think, I've learned from the best, so you can take some credit there.
Adam is good.
While I was sitting there, I was actually surprised at how much I felt like I was getting to know them there. Unlike you guys, I'm not on the campaign trail. I don't see them in the legislature. I'm removed, so I see them on TV a lot. What I saw there, and particularly with Meili, was a stronger Meili. Like, he was standing up tall. He got his hands out. He turned to Mo. He acknowledged him. He challenged him a bit more, which I feel like I haven't seen when he's sort of been out and about. So that I really noticed right away. For Mo, I saw in a lot of cases, sometimes like a kinder, gentler Mo. Like, sometimes his voice is so loud that it feels almost aggressive. But last night I didn't feel that, and he certainly didn't use that on Meili. Like, they were really respectful, which is something that I really appreciated watching. And I actually walked away from that debate feeling like I learned a couple things.
Do you think it was deliberate? Do you think they went really far out of their way to have this really conciliatory, professional tone that we saw last night? Because compared not only just to what we've seen in recent federal U.S. presidential debates, but what we've seen in Saskatchewan last time, and Arthur wrote about this last week, about his only introduction to Cam Broten seemed to be Cam Broten in the debate, which really wasn't Cam Broten, because he's pretty mild. But first to you, I guess, Merelda, was it deliberate? Do you think that were they both trying to reach somehow a same goal of presenting an image that's a little bit more calm and conciliatory than maybe some of us were expecting?
Oh, I think they did for sure. And I think that's probably for two reasons. One, you don't want to look like the Americans, which is something that, people make memes out of. So the last thing they want during the last 11 days of the election is to have a series of memes about being an attack dog. But the other part of that too, I think, is people can't make decisions if they don't actually know where the parties stand on certain policies. So I think they were really making a concerted effort last night to show their differences in just a much more respectful way.
Reporters doing stories tend to get immediate feedback sometimes, not always. But have you had any sense right now this morning, Arthur, in terms of the who won, who lost, things from people talking to you about your story or everything else? Or is it kind of hard to tell from this? Merelda and I are obviously maybe a little too close to the podium to offer.
I find it just as hard to read as you do. Of course, all the reaction that we're seeing on social media is largely driven by partisans that are automatically going to claim that their side won. But when you really look at what the two parties had to do, it's hard to see how Mo lost this. He really just had to avoid anything disastrous happening. He had to basically appear competent, and he had to avoid any kind of knockout blow getting landed against him, and that just didn't happen. Meili didn't back him into a corner. I agree entirely with what we just heard from Merelda, that Meili looked confident, Mo looked calm, everything was cordial, but there wasn't really enough last night to shake things up and fundamentally change the dynamic of the campaign.
Yeah. He had one great line there I'll have to share with you. Just before the debate started, he turned to Molly Thompson and I, the host, and said, "This debate's going to be about Murray, Molly, Meili, Mo in terms of a choice." I thought that was a good line. They were remarkably calm going into this, and this is something just a little inside baseball that others didn't get to see. But they were chatting quite regularly and friendly with us prior to the debate. I guess they had never really kind of met you before, Merelda, and they were just they seemed loose though to me when they were talking to you.
I agree. They walked in, everyone was pretty calm. They had that conversation. One of the first things I said when I got home last night and was talking to my husband was how relaxed it was. You didn't feel that weird tension sometimes that you feel between leaders where they come in and you feel it. Last night, they really came in ready to do the work that they needed to do, which was just a relief for those of us sitting on the panel.
Yeah, and I think that came as a bit of a surprise to us. Maybe we were expecting a little bit more tension and hostility. I thought the issues would provide that in terms of the response, but instead, what I was sensing was a bit more thoughtfulness in terms of how they wanted to frame each issue. And we're going to get specifically into your issue, the questions you raised, because they're so bloody important, Merelda. But what issues do you think the voters are going to take away from this debate last night, Arthur, that might have resonated with them more than anybody was expecting?
I think that the tax and spend issues and the economic issues are going to remain important, and I think that those were the exchanges that became especially combative, where we saw Mo directly speaking into the camera and warning voters that Meili is going to raise your taxes. Meili doing the exact same thing, trying to convince you that Mo is going to cut your services and sell your crowns. These seem to be really the issues where the two leaders are trying to stoke fear and supercharge emotions. And we all know that that's what gets the most traction in politics. That being said, I think one of the more emotionally charged moments in the debate was in response to some of Merelda's questions.
Yes.
Particularly when Meili attacked very hard about the Premier's refusal to meet with Tristan Durocher on the lawns of the Legislative Building. And I think that Mo avoided stepping into any particularly dangerous territory there. He basically stuck to the lines that he's given us throughout that issue. So I don't think he got himself into trouble, but he did look defensive, and
a little bit.
It'll be interesting to see whether that gets any traction in the days.
There was a couple of moments there, and that was one. I'm going to get into that with Merelda in 30 seconds, but first I'd like to ask Merelda about Alison Bamford's question related to safe consumption sites, the problem with overdoses, because I think they were actually sincerely taken aback by that question. Watching their
agree.
Yeah, it's I get why Mo would be, because this has not been a strength for this government. And but can you explain to people out there that might wonder why in a debate with everything else going on, why that question would be so important to ask?
Well, I think if they were listening to what Alison said, it's on track to kill more people. And I can't remember all of the exact things, but car accidents.
It's everything.
And when we think it's everything. So when we think about what's happening out there, if you think about justice and safety, if you think about health and mental health, if you think about the cost that we have to pay in order to deal with these things, people shouldn't be surprised by that question at all. It's at the heart of some of the most costly pieces of our social programs, because so many programs tie into that. And I think they were both a little taken aback, which I was surprised by. I would have been, I guess if I were in their camps, I think I would have been preparing them for that, because you just had to look at some of the problems that we're facing. And then we know from research, into COVID over the last, several months, that things like domestic abuse and all of those things are exacerbated by this. So we know all of these problems are getting bigger, not smaller, and trying to deal with it with less money, which is exactly what both of them are essentially talking about. We have less money to deal with an ever increasing problem.
I've been dying to ask you this since the debate because it's the whole crux of why you were there. But I want to know if you were happy or you were satisfied coming from the venue you come from in life, and you can explain that to the viewers out there if you so wish. But coming from your perspective as a Métis woman, did you have a sense of satisfaction with any of the answers that you got last night? Do you think it at least caused people to think, or caused them to think about how they were handling the situation? Because particularly your question related to where are you getting your advice? How do you process information to collect it and assemble it in some kind of successful policy? I think they were really also taken aback by that question because they stopped and, gee, I guess no one's ever asked us that before. Were you satisfied with what you heard back from them last night, Merelda?
It was one of those times where I felt they had to work through an answer while they were standing there. And I really, if the answers themselves didn't provide me everything, I probably didn't expect that. There's not enough time for us to have that conversation. But I appreciated that both of them tried to work through it. I think it gives them pause to go back into their own parties now. At least it would have me if I hadn't thought about that before. To really ask yourself, what is the voice that that Indigenous person has in our party? Do I listen to them? Do I bring them in when we start talking about these policies? What does that sound like? I mean, as a Métis person, I've worked in organizations where people say they want your opinion, but often they don't because it's a really hard conversation to have. Like all of the things that you think you're doing to help might actually hurt. And it's a really hard thing to say, I have to really take myself out of this position where I think I'm trying to do something good and admit that that's not maybe the case.
Can you explain that, what you mean by that, more from the perspective of politicians? Because I think they sincerely do want to help. No one wants to see a high suicide rate. No one wants to see unemployment. Why do you think it doesn't ever translate? And we're going to get into that in the next segment because election time is a brilliant time to talk about this issue. But why can politicians never translate sincere concerns that I think that they do have into functioning policies? I'm always amazed by that. And
well, obviously, now that I'm a PhD candidate at Johnson Shoyama School of Public Policy, I think about public policy a lot more than I ever have in my entire life. I actually have had so many revelations over this last like 2 years as I've been working through all of the programming and then working through sort of my own questions. But there's this moment when you start to form a policy as a group of people where if you don't have the voices of the people who are actually impacted by your policy sitting right there at the table, you're going to miss things. So if we could imagine what it was like when, you know, the 60s scoop kind of, you know, like legislation was in place, I think people at the time maybe genuinely thought they were helping, but probably what they couldn't understand was that the underlying portion of that was that they viewed Indian people or Indigenous people as a problem that they could fix. And the heart of every issue with policy when it comes to Indigenous people is that you view them as a problem you have to fix. Those images play out. And I don't blame the media. I mean, the problems are real. So how do you not show those problems? That would be a huge disservice. But those images play out for people. So elected leaders who maybe don't have as much connection to Indigenous communities, then trying to create policy is kind of like me trying to tell you as a man, well, this would work best for you in your healthcare plan. Well, I actually don't know that. I don't have any sort of experience that would back that up. And I see that sort of now. And it was something that I didn't necessarily see as a journalist, but really that point at which without that inclusion, without knowing our story,
you just assume that, yeah.
Policy.
It's funny because you just assume that always happens. They're surrounded by smart people. They're surrounded by bureaucrats in the case of government where people who spent, like yourself, who spent their whole lives thinking about these things, developing policy, doing things where they're trying to move forward. I always find it the problem being the political translation, and that's where it comes home in the debate last night. They can't articulate a soundbite solution to anything that we're hearing right now, and I think that's personally the struggle they really had with your question. They actually had to stop and think about it, and they had no soundbite for it, and it was an interesting moment for me anyway, just as somebody who's watched these way too much, to sort of see that happening live.
And they probably weren't expecting Meili to come back to me, right? To say,
No.
did they answer your question? And my question is really about relationships, because the heart of everything that's happening right now, whether it's with Indigenous people or seniors or others, is really about relationships. It's about how we relate to one another. What do we give each other enough credit? So that cordial thing that we saw between the two of them, do you have that with other communities? Like, do you meet with them? Do you talk to them? Like, not on the campaign trail, that's a different kind of meet and greet, but are you actively involved in communities outside of your own sphere? And if you're not, how do you govern them? Like, right? It was your question about responsible government that really led into me. It's like, how can you be responsible?
Yeah, it was sort of a fascinating process to watch. Our next segment is going to be specifically on these issues. I believe it's Phil's segment, Arthur?
It is Phil's, yes.
Yeah, that's why he's not here, obviously, because he's working on it. But I think it's something that's absolutely crucial to bring up in the campaign. I'm so glad we had this opportunity. I guess we have to wrap it up. I thank you so much both. Next week, I'm inviting people that are stupider than me, because I don't like this business of always having people smarter than me to talk to, because I look dumb. But comes with that's why they give you a column, so that your willingness to look dumb. I thank you both, Merelda Fiddler, Vanier Scholar, Arthur White, who's off to another press conference right now. So good luck with the rest of the campaign trail, and Campaigniacs. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thanks, Maria.
Welcome back to Campaigniacs. I'm Phil Tank. I'm here with Saskatoon journalist Betty Ann Adam and Regina artist Joely BigEagle-Kequahtooway. In this episode, we're going to take a look at Indigenous issues in the provincial election. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Phil.
And I'm going to give you each a little bit of time to explain who you are and your background. Why don't we start with you, Joely?
Okay, hi there. My name is Joely BigEagle-Kequahtooway. I'm Nakota Cree Soto from Wiper First Nations. I'm an artist. I'm co-founder of Buffalo People Arts Institute. Our mission is to bring back the buffalo mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. But I'm also a registered professional engineer with APEGS, and I also have a mathematics degree from First Nations University.
Very impressive. And you, Betty Ann?
I was a reporter with the Star Phoenix for 29 years until 2018. And I'm a member of Fond du Lac Dene First Nation in northern Saskatchewan. And since I left the paper, I've been continuing to work in journalism, working with doing freelance writing and editing and things like that. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay. And before we get into what the parties are saying about Indigenous issues in this election, I found it interesting that when you look in, the Saskatchewan Party policy or platform, you actually see like a whole section devoted to First Nations, and in the NDP platform, it's kind of sprinkled throughout. I'm just wondering whether you think that's a victory in and of itself, that the parties are now actually putting into their platforms solid things about Indigenous people.
Well, I think the fact that they acknowledge that there are Indigenous people is worth noting, and yet I think it should go without saying that Indigenous people are very important, a very important part of Saskatchewan residents. We are the first peoples here. Many of us are treaty people. I mean, everyone in Saskatchewan's treaty people, of course, but many of us Indigenous people are signatories to treaty, and everything that is happening in Saskatchewan when governments are deciding where to emphasize spending in budgets, they need to consider that Indigenous people in Saskatchewan are at disadvantage because of historic policies which continue to affect the lives of individuals. Now, these are historic policies like we all know about, like the Indian residential schools and the pass system and various things that kept Indigenous people out of the economy, but also are the current day policies which continue to negatively affect Indigenous people. And so these things need to be addressed. And if parties are going to talk about reconciliation, if they are going to raise that word themselves, then they have to acknowledge that that word comes to us from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which came out with 94 calls to action. And so we don't want to just hear the word reconciliation sprinkled around because it sounds good. We want to see policies that address the 94 calls to action. We want to see policy that affects people's lives today.
Yeah, and I'll just interject here for a second before Joely answers. It's interesting that the 94 calls to action came up before the last provincial election in April of 2016. But over to you, Joely.
Well, I think that all the other parties have always had some kind of platform that identifies some of our Indigenous, I guess, issues within our province. And I know at the last election that there was virtually nothing with regards to Indigenous people, because that's something that I definitely look for. And so, it's just, I think maybe it's on the forefront, and I don't feel like it's something that the Sask party necessarily is going to follow through. Like I just know that in the past there's been too many instances of just neglecting issues, such as especially having Tristan DesRoches here in Regina at the Capitol, sitting in a teepee across the lawn from the Legislative Building, and not once in 44 days did Scott Moe cross that lawn to come and talk to him. So now anything that they put forth, any platform that they put forth is moot. It doesn't have any. There's no. I wouldn't believe it. And so, having them put it on their website or their platform or any information I just got a pamphlet mailed to me today about Scott Moe, and so it's just you can tell that social media is a big is something that all parties need to identify, and having young people being involved more in social media these days. They know that the effects of what Tristan DesRoches just himself did to this province, and raising not only the awareness of what the Sask party is capable in terms of not even identifying suicide in this province, but also putting the spotlight on Saskatchewan by all the other provinces and the world. So I believe that if there is any platform regarding Indigenous people, it is just because of the pressure that they felt from all the other people in the world. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's really reflective of anything that they will put forth in the future.
And have you had a chance to look at what the parties are saying so far during the election campaign, and what do you think of what you're hearing so far?
It to me, it seems like they're taking a chapter out of the politics in the South. Doing their best to dig up as much negative information as they can about each candidate, and sharing that on social media and in the news, and also to, I guess using some of their campaign funds to project themselves as the next door neighbor kind of guy. Or I noticed that in some of the billboards in the city, which are really expensive to be able to pay for, Scott Moe is alongside each of the campaign, each of the members that are running. And to me, that seems like really a Trump kind of politics, that they associate themselves with Scott Moe, and that means that they're supporting each other. And to me, it reminds me of the old boys club, And so it seems to me that it's the same old, that the people that they're catering to are the people that, you know, that are of the elite class and the ones that can vote. And I know that there are so many issues with getting, you know, the ones that need to vote out there. And so I don't see, you know, that kind of politicking or campaigning happening, especially in my community. I live in North Central, and not once, as far back, and I've lived here for not almost 10 years, not once has a Sask Party campaign person come knock on my door. So,
Betty Ann,
Hmm.
what do you think?
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. What do you think about what you're hearing so far?
Well, to tell the truth, first off, I have, just following up on what Joely said, I've had NDP, the NDP candidate in my riding come to the door more than once, and I've had a lot of calls from them and such. And so in my riding, the candidate is Ryan Meili. So that I thought that was just interesting that I also haven't had a visit from a Saskatchewan Party member, and I am home like 99% of the time, so I don't think I've missed anybody.
Like many people.
And yeah, and I guess when it comes to what I'm hearing from the Saskatchewan Party, I can't help but take and I'll believe it when I see it attitude. Because in my own experience as a member of the 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Saskatchewan, which I'm the co-chair of that, we did sharing circles to talk to 60 Scoop survivors to find out what they wanted in an apology. And the Premier we had given us a very, very tight timeline and said that if we would get it done before, this is a couple years ago now, if we would get it done before the beginning of December, they would do the apology in the legislature. And we got it to them as quickly as we could. And I think we missed the deadline to get it in for the legislature by a day or two. And so we said, well, that's okay. Like, we're willing to wait until the spring sitting of the legislature. That's no problem. There's no big hurry for the apology. And Scott Moe had promised his constituents that he was going to apologize that year. So he didn't make his deadline either, but he had the apology right after the new year. Like, it was on the 9th of January, and the legislature wasn't sitting. And so instead of waiting until the legislature opened in March, he had the apology in January in the rotunda of the legislative building, which means that it isn't on the official government record. They rushed it so that he could do it immediately. And so now in the Hansard record of the government of Saskatchewan and of the Saskatchewan Party government in particular, there is no apology on the public record. In the historic record, it was done in the public space of the rotunda, and which was very disappointing to us. We requested that they wait and do it on the record, and they didn't. And then we heard a very moving apology from the Premier. There were people in tears, but words are only words unless there's action attached to them. And it was interesting that when the legislature did sit, the leader of the opposition did apologize in the legislature, in the House. That's on the record. But these things mean something. When we have a premier, when we have a government that says nice things but doesn't follow up with action, well, he turns into the boy who cries wolf. And why should we believe anything he says? Because he has said nice things to us many times. And yet when it comes to spending, I mean, we know that as soon as Tristan DeRocher finished his fast, 11 days later, the province joined with the feds and the FSIN to make a letter of commitment. And they said they're going to address suicide, youth suicide. And yet, when we look at the platforms, we see in the Star Phoenix today, we see that the Saskatchewan Party it hasn't named Indigenous suicide as an issue in the Indigenous community specifically, but says they'll give $1.2 million toward preventing suicide, whereas the other party, it says they'll give $5 million to suicide. So, I mean, right there's just like kind of this difference in the emphasis that the government places on the things that are adversely affecting Indigenous people. And when you have children killing themselves, choosing that they do not want to live, how bad is life? How bad must their lives be? And the questions are, like, when we look at suicide, that is the worst possible outcome of mental health issues. And we know there's large, widespread mental health issues that are results of trauma, intergenerational trauma, ongoing traumas. We know these things are going on, and we do not see the serious commitment in spending toward providing mental health services, especially to those isolated communities.
Just looking at the Saskatchewan Party platform, they point out that they provided like more than $200 million in targeted investments for First Nations organizations and things like that. That they, part of their pandemic relief was $45 million towards helping out the organizations that would normally be helped out through casinos, which of course had to close. Like, how do you respond to that?
I think that I'd like to actually see how that is broken down, because, my mother works in the front lines of drug and alcohol awareness, and so one of the biggest issues that she talks about is the need for a place for her clients to go to that are dealing with mental health issues, never mind gambling issues, but like especially meth issues, and of course, where do our youth go for suicide issues? And you can look at what happened just recently in Regina. We had a young person go to the lake in the middle, right across from the legislative building, and commit an act of suicide because he was turned away at our hospital. Where are these funds being placed? Because they're definitely not being placed where our community needs them. And I know that our First Nation got some COVID relief, and there were very strict guidelines what those COVID relief funds could be used for, which was cleaning tools, cleaning supplies, and masks. And I know as a nonprofit that we also looked at some of these relief funds, but we applied for some of the government relief funds and got denied because we want to provide art therapy. And so, we know that those funds were geared towards cleaning supplies and masks. And so, so the unfortunately, the ones that got the benefit of it are the ones who make cleaning supplies and make masks. So, so it didn't address the core issues that are affecting our community, especially now we're seeing a spike in mental health issues within our communities because people are forced to stay home and are unable to interact in our communities how we usually do in ceremonies or powwows or round dances or get-togethers, right? And so, yeah, $40 million doesn't go a long way, and I know that, and I would, but if it's dispersed even amongst 74 First Nations, which I know that our First Nation didn't get a lot of money because we have over 2,000 people, and we weren't given money individually. We were given, like I said, cleaning supplies. So how does that help in the bigger picture with regards to mental health issues and suicide prevention?
And I appreciate that the government spread out funding for COVID to help in the best way they could, but we don't expect anything less. We're not. I mean, they provided money to other municipalities as well, and so mainstream Saskatchewan people benefited as well from any kinds of assistance from the government. And the fact that they also assisted First Nations communities should not be something they get a pat on the back for. It's like, that's business as usual. We expect that. And nobody should be particularly impressed because we're getting equal treatment. So
I want to talk about what's in the NDP platform as well. They pledged $10 million to implement the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, $5 million for a suicide strategy. They want to reform the child welfare system, and they want to try to close the gap in health, education, and justice. Now, I'm wondering if there's a sense of frustration when Indigenous people hear that, because it's not a matter of, I think everyone kind of probably agrees we want to close the gap and we want greater equality, but, like, how do you actually achieve that?
I think that in the past year, since, eventually, the truth of the matter is we're being affected by the U.S. politics, and Trump being in office has raised, the level of white nationalism to the forefront of our communities, that the KKK and organizations that support organizations like the KKK, it isn't contained in the States, and especially here in Saskatchewan, when we look at what's happening, and we look at the high profile case of Colton Boushie, and how that has become, you can no longer cover up these incidences where our governments are, I guess, complicit in racist atrocities. That when I look at when you talk about the NDP platform and about their I guess they want to help the community, and they're going to do their best to help the community with providing some of these resources. I know that I have more belief in that platform, because we run a nonprofit where we participate in a lot of community activities, not just in Regina, but in southern Saskatchewan. And when we attend those events and those activities, whether they're social events or whether they're political events or whether they're Tristan DeRoche's suicide awareness camp, the NDP were there. They were there in person. And not only were they there in person, but they actually contributed, like, here's $50 to help out an elder, to buy this elder food while they're attending this camp. And it wasn't something that they asked for to be recognized on social media, or they didn't bring a video reporter from any of the news agencies. It's just something that they knew helped the community. So I have more faith in the NDP members than I do in our Sask Party members. And I know I have seen some of the Sask Party members circling around, but I've never really actually interacted with them because they haven't interacted with me. Whereas the NDP, they've always been one to come up and say, this is, how can I help? What can I do? And that holds a lot more weight than just somebody coming for a photo opportunity.
Yeah, with the I have to say that I appreciate that the NDP has identified issues that are affecting Indigenous people, and so they say that they want to provide money to address gangs and gang membership and leaving gangs. And I mean, if you look at the root causes of gangs, if you look at the sense of alienation that young Indigenous men especially feel, as soon as an Indigenous male hits puberty, society starts to look at him as a threat, and they start to fear him. so that if he's 22 years old and drunk and comes on your farm, then oh my gosh, it is this, it's like this is as if your life is at risk, and that's really unfortunate. But the fact is that those kind of attitudes have pushed Indigenous men, boys and teenagers and young men feel sidelined in society, and gangs are one of the places where they have a sense of belonging. And as shameful as that is, that this is the best our society can do, is to get that Indigenous young men, especially those who come from situations of poverty, feel that this is the only place where they're ever going to get any respect. And so to have, like in Saskatoon, straight up has had great success working intensely one-on-one with young men, usually coming out of prison, where they've had time to dry out and had time to reflect on what they want their lives to be. And then when they come out, there's some place for them to go, some place that gives them hope, helps them to stay on track, and helps them to find employment, and helps them to be better fathers and better partners. And so this is real world stuff. And for every dollar that goes into helping some young man find his way clear of the gangs and to start his life and get a job and start paying taxes and being a good dad and being a good partner and a good citizen, those dollars come back to all of society. And so that's one example of the things I see in policies that are going to address people where they live. I was a little dismayed when I saw that the NDP said they were going to study education. And then I said, wait a minute, no, because we saw a slippage. For many years, we've been seeing real improvements in the graduation rates of Indigenous students from high school. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a slip. And we don't know why. I know for me, it's like, what's going on? Well, and then I go and here I see that one of the parties is looking like we have to study what's going on with education for Indigenous people. And I think, okay, like, let's get to the root of this. And as Indigenous people, we all have been studied and studied and studied. But when it comes to education, this is so key to changing lives and changing futures, that it's imperative. And when I see policies that will affect Indigenous people in their real lives and help to overcome some of the barriers that stop Indigenous people from joining into the economy and joining into society and having the best lives they can have. I want to see policies that help people have the best lives they can have. And I don't want to see policies that continue to feed on fear. Like Joely mentioned, this whole fear thing, this division between us and them, these ideas that we see very prevalent in the United States. I don't like to see that in Saskatchewan. But personally, I couldn't help thinking that when Colton Boushie was shot, that immediately there was a clear division within Saskatchewan, where white farmers especially were all saying, oh, I would never, ever go onto somebody else's farm, or no one should ever go onto anybody else's farm. Well, how do you ring a doorbell if you're not on their property? But going along with that, after the Colton Boushie killing, the Saskatchewan Party changed their trespass laws and made it harder for Indigenous people to exercise their treaty rights to hunt and gather according to their traditions. That is a treaty right. We were promised the ability to do that. But if you have absentee landlords living out of province or something, and you're trying to hunt, well, who do you even ask? How do you even know who to ask? It's not like there's a farm on every quarter, And so so we have the provincial government implementing laws, trespass laws, which infringe the treaties and which reinforce this sense of we have to circle our wagons to keep the Indians off our property. That's how it feels. That's how that policy, that change in legislation, that was the feeling it had for me. And I feel as though it really reinforced this idea of fear. And I'm just going to add, because people talked about property rights and everything at the time of Colton Boushie, let us not forget that it was Ian, what was his last name? I didn't think I'd ever forget his name. It was Ian Stables. Ian Stables is the rancher who lived south of Saskatoon, who was going out stealing millions of dollars worth of equipment from his farmer, from his neighbors, and also from dealerships. Millions. They found over $2 million worth of equipment, all kinds of stuff stolen on this white this white rancher's farm. Way more than he could ever use. And yet it's Indigenous people who are always looked at with suspicion. So I think that we need policies that are going to help to tear down stereotypes and create some understanding and unity between people.
All right, thanks. I'd like to thank both my guests this week. That's all the time we have. Thanks for listening to Campaigniacs. And tune in next week for more analysis on the provincial election.